Well, good afternoon, good Friday afternoon. I will call to order the September 19th, 2025 meeting of the Climate Action Sustainability Committee. Would you please call the roll?
Yeah. Councilmember Burt. Here. Chair Inker.
Here.
Councilmember Lou.
Here.
For the record, 3 are present.
Thank you. All right, and with that, we'll move to public comment for matters not on the agenda, but within the purview of this committee. Do we have any requests to speak?
To the chair, I've received no public comment cards.
Okay, great. Anyone in the room? Looks like not. All right. So we can move to standing verbal reports, starting with staff. Do you have anything?
Thank you. Just one announcement today. Brad Eggleston, Director of Public Works, and we had a slide, I think that worked out. So after almost 6 years of effort by city staff and the San Francisco Estuary Partnership, we're very excited to announce that the Palo Alto Horizontal Levee Pilot Project, adjacent to the Regional Water Quality Control Plant, began construction last week. And we've got a little slide here just to illustrate this. So this is really showing, for those who may not be familiar, the location of the levee there along the treatment plant road. It'll be about 500 feet long. And then the main photo in the background is just some of the initiation of the construction work last week. So just to point out again, this is the first nature-based horizontal levee to be built in San Francisco Bay that will beneficially reuse treated wastewater for irrigation as part of the levee design. So it's going to provide habitat enhancement, sea level rise adaptation, and the additional wastewater treatment that comes along. So I think it's on the slide, we're expecting the project should only take a few months, so expected to be complete in early 2026. And for those who may be interested, there's more information if you go to the website at www.paloalto.gov/horizontal levee. So turn it back to you, Chairman.
Well, that is outstanding. Thank you for that. And at least I was right when my husband and daughter and I were walking out there last weekend and I saw all the stuff started and I said, I think that's the horizontal levee. So I'm glad to know that. No, that's a terrific milestone. So something we can be proud of. Thank you. And so with that, we'll move to committee member comments and announcements. I'll just very briefly say that, let folks know that next week is the annual Northern California Power Agency Conference, and we'll have a commission meeting and I'll just report back on that afterward. And then wanted to also let people know, they probably do, it's just very newsworthy that the governor has now signed the Cap and Invest legislation, as well as the Pathways Initiative that extends energy markets throughout the western states so that we can send California solar powered energy outside the state and take advantage of New Mexico wind, et cetera, et cetera. So those two things are now law. That's all I have. Pat, do you have anything today? Okay. Don't you? No. Okay, great. And we can move on to our first action item. I'll turn it over to whom? Okay, all right, thank you. Well,
good afternoon, Carla Daly, Assistant Director of Utilities. So there was the slide deck that was in the packet was not the correct one. So we do have a slightly different deck. There are quite a few slides in it, but I'm going to go through pretty quickly and actually skip over some slides, but can certainly go back to anything that the council members would like to talk more detail about. And as we're waiting for that to come up. Great, next slide, please. Quick look at the agenda. I won't linger here. Next slide, please. So why did we do a one water plan? As you are well aware, the SCAP has multiple chapters in it. One chapter is water. One of the key actions in that water chapter did provide staff the direction to complete the one water plan. It really is a framework that will hopefully allow council to make decisions regarding water supply and conservation in the future should reliability become a concern. The time horizon for this study was 20 years, so 2025 to 2045. And we did receive, as part of this work, an Excel-based tool that is very easy to change. So staff with pretty broad Excel skills can use this and modify that tool in the future. Next slide, please. This study and this tool kind of allows staff and the council to take a comprehensive look at the relative merits of different potential supply and conservation alternatives. It helps us avoid fragmented analysis. The idea that, hey, what about this technology? What about that technology? We've kind of combined them all into one place. And we have, we've done a lot of planning over the years. We do integrated resources plans for water. We did a water reuse study in conjunction with Valley Water a number of years ago. And so we've had kind of these different pieces of planning, and this was an attempt to bring those all together in one place, get some input from the community, make sure that all the ideas were on the table, and have some way of measuring the merits of those projects against each other. And we did identify the project types that are most likely to be attractive in the future. There are some ideas that were pretty clearly not very attractive, and so it allowed us to kind of evaluate those and put those to the side. And it also gives us the ability, when future regional water supply type partnerships arise, some kind of a benchmark that we can kind of compare those against some of the work that we've done looking at some of these alternatives within Palo Alto. The study is not a detailed feasibility analysis. These are very high level planning cost estimates, and should the council down the road ever want to consider a project either in Palo Alto or in partnership with other water agencies, we would need to do much more detailed feasibility analyses before recommending moving forward with any of those types of projects. Next slide, please. So just really quickly, this was kind of the process that we followed in this study. We came up with a whole bunch of ideas on different types of water supply and conservation projects, put those through a pre-screening process, whittled that down a little bit, and then with that remaining pool, did a little more screening using yield, reliability, and cost. And then the projects that made it through that stage were evaluated as part of potential portfolios. Really because Palo Alto is relatively small, and some of the project types that made it through to that last stage are potentially quite expensive and quite large. Each portfolio ended up being our base current resource, the San Francisco supply, plus one other project, with the exception of conservation, which I'll talk more about in a minute. Next slide, please. So here's kind of an example of, in that pre-screening stage, the projects that were put into 3 different buckets. They already doing it, or at least plan to do it in the near future, not feasible at this time, and then the projects that made it through to the final stage. And I'll just pull one out as an example: the temporary dewatering sites. This is something that happens in Palo Alto at times when folks are building basements or large underground parking in the case of commercial type projects. And particularly in homes that are close to the bay, there can be quite a lot of water that needs to be dealt with as the basement is being built. But by their nature and by the title of this project, they're temporary. And so it is very, very difficult and not cost effective to build a lot of infrastructure around those sites in order to capture that water for short periods of time. So that's one that falls into the not feasible category. Next slide, please. Once we had the projects that made it through to the last stage, those were evaluated on these 4 broad areas, as far as criteria, reliability, cost, ease of implementation, and environmental benefits. Those weights were derived through community meetings and, but they're very easily changed in the model, and I would fully expect that those be revisited down the line if we're considering any projects in the future. Next slide, please. These are the 6 different portfolios, plus our baseline of San Francisco supply that made it to the last stage. I do have a number of slides that go through these each in detail and kind of describe the technology. I think in the interest of time, I'll skip over all of those and we can go back to them if there are questions about specific portfolios. So I think to slide 14 would be the next one. Great, thank you. Every portfolio did include conservation, either kind of what we call phase 1, so 1 step up from the types of conservation that we do currently, or phase 2, which are a level higher as you might expect. And I'll just pull out a couple of examples here. Right now, we offer rebates for residents to convert their turf at their homes to drought tolerant and biodiversity friendly plantings. An example of a stepped up conservation program might be that we also offer landscaping design assistance, lists of contractors, that sort of thing. Another example is restricting days of the week for watering during the summer irrigation seasons. Right now, we don't have any permanent restrictions on that. In times of drought, we often ask folks to either water only 3 days a week or 2 days a week, but we could have something permanently on our books that asks our residents to only irrigate 3 days a week during those hot summer months. And I would say that we have another thing going on in California, which is the Making Conservation a California Way of Life legislation and regulation that lays out urban water use targets for all agencies in California. And we're still in a place where we are evaluating what those targets look like for Palo Alto, and they decrease over time. And so we might want to consider not just as part of this one water effort, but in our due diligence in making sure that we're going to be meeting those urban water use targets, some of these stepped up conservation measures. Next slide, please. The other projects that I just want to point out is our groundwater well. So in One Water, we were looking at groundwater as a permanent ongoing supply blended in with our SFPUC water. But we are planning sometime in the near to medium term to do some projects to help us be ready to use groundwater in case of a drought, if need be. We have some difficulty right now doing that because of the difference in chemical treatment between what we're able to do here in Palo Alto and what SFPUC does. They use chloramine, and we don't have ammonia capabilities here in the city. And so in order to use that water for drinking water, the pipes really have to be kind of empty. So in the case of a catastrophic earthquake where pipelines are breaking all over the place and we don't have any SFPUC water in the pipelines, we could bring groundwater into the system, both for firefighting, of course, but also for drinking water. But if we wanted to be set up, just in case we wanted to do some blending, we do need to do a little bit of work out there. And so that's something not in the budget right now, but on our radar that we would like to do. Next slide, please. So this is how the different portfolios look from a volume standpoint, just to give you all an idea of how much water we could be talking about from projects like this. And you can see conservation, phases 1 and 2 are assumed to be in every portfolio. They're relatively small compared to our needs here in Palo Alto. And then when you look at some of those, big, more expensive projects like desalination or a direct potable reuse project, they could yield quite a lot of water. So I think it's helpful to just get an idea of what the order of magnitude is here that we're talking about. Next slide, please. This is, using those 4 criteria and using those weights that were assumed and assigned in this particular run in the study. This is how the different portfolios end up scoring. And you can see, for example, conservation scores quite well on cost. It's pretty cheap to embark on those additional conservation measures. Whereas if you look at a portfolio such as C with desalination, or I'll just say desal so I don't trip over that word, and direct potable reuse, those have quite high reliability scores. Next slide, please. So we did do some sensitivities. I think the results are not very surprising. If you put a lot more weight on cost, conservation looks even better. Some of those bigger, more expensive projects don't fare as well. And then conversely, on the next slide, please, if reliability is weighted more heavily, then those bigger projects that do have quite high reliability end up looking better. Slide, please. We also did a very back of the envelope bill impact analysis. This is looking at the fiscal year 2045, so the tail end of the study. And you can see that because conservation is inexpensive and cost effective, there could be a very minor small bill decrease as a result of those activities, whereas some of those other projects do add costs and end up causing bill increases for our ratepayers. Next slide, please. So a few currently planned activities, in addition to the groundwater project that I mentioned, we do ongoing conservation all the time. AMI meters being installed is a really big step toward folks being able to see what kind of usage they have and being alerted to leaks. So that's great. We have that already in place for a lot of our customers. We will explore enhanced conservation measures, as I said, in conjunction with our analysis of making conservation a California way of life. We always monitor funding opportunities, and the Bay Area Water Supply and Conservation Agency, which is comprised of all 26 of the regional water agencies who take water from San Francisco, are also embarking on a long-term water strategy project called Strategy 2050. And so we are engaged with that and participating in all the meetings and conversations around that project as well. Next slide, please. Some important events that might warrant revisiting this in the future. San Francisco is doing its own alternative water supply plan. We are expecting an update from them sometime around 2027. You might remember that we have an agreement with Valley Water that gives them the option to take approximately half of the effluent from the regional water quality control plant. That option expires at the end of 2032. The project that they were studying that was associated with that effluent has been put on pause, so there's no activity going on around that right now. But in any case, the contract does allow them to have that option through 2032. So some of the things that we might consider doing with the effluent from the regional water quality control plant, be it a project in Palo Alto or joining with someone else in the region to do some sort of water reuse project, we're pretty limited until we know whether Valley Water is going to exercise that option or not. The Bay Delta plan is still something that the state has not made a decision about. And of course, there are many other events or conditions that could affect water supply or cost, and new technologies or regional partnership opportunities that might come our way that we might want to take a look at. Next slide, please. This is just a quick list of all the stakeholder engagement that we had throughout this project. Next slide, please. Oh, and one thing I want to say on the last slide, sorry, you don't need to go back to it, but we did work really closely with our friends and colleagues in Public Works throughout this process. They helped us scope the plan. One thing that we really wanted to take a close look at in this effort was stormwater capture and green stormwater infrastructure. And so we worked really closely with the folks in Public Works to make sure that we were covering that correctly in this plan. UAC did have some feedback when we took this plan to them back in January. You have the letter from the UAC in your packet, and there was a letter that came in, or an email that came in just a couple of hours ago from two of the commissioners. I don't know if any of you have had a chance to read that, but they did have a number of issues with the work that was done. Concern about a large infrastructure project, which we're not recommending right now. Concern around the weighting and the scoring methodology that can be changed in the tool. And I would also fully expect that council would not want to just look at a pretty bar chart with weighted scores before making a decision, but would really want to understand capital costs, O&M, all of the nitty-gritty details of anything that was being contemplated for actually spending large amounts of money on. Partnerships, definitely key, regional partnerships. We completely agree with that opinion. And also that direct potable reuse, so taking effluent from a regional plant like our own and converting that to drinking water would require a lot of outreach, and that would very likely happen at a regional level, as a project like that would more likely than just Palo Alto alone be a regional project. And then there's also this underlying concern regarding the SFPUC's drought practices, system operating practices, and their projected shortages during a drought. So that was also highlighted in the UAC's letter. Next slide, please. So our recommendation today is just that the committee receive this report and staff report, including the UAC's letter, which was attached. And the next step would be sending the full package on to City Council as an information item with no need for action by the council. Those are all of my remarks, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, well, thank you, Ms. Daly, for that presentation. I think I'm gonna move directly to public comment on this item.
Chair, we have 3 public commenters. Our first public commenter is Peter D. So I'll invite you to come up here.
Welcome.
And how many minutes did you want to allow?
3.
3. All right.
Thank you for the welcome. Getting rusty. Peter Dreckmeyer, I'm Policy Director for the Tuolumne River Trust. There is a fatal flaw in One Water plan, and that is that it's based on the premise that we might experience 50% rationing. That's a arbitrary and manufactured political number that came from the SFPUC, aimed at justifying their opposition to the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan, which the City of Palo Alto is on record supporting. So what happened is we spent $559,000 on a report that's going to sit on a shelf. And we can't change that, but we need to figure out what went wrong so it doesn't happen again. And we need to help others learn from our experience and not make the same mistake. So Bosca, they're embarking on their long-term water reliable water supply strategy. And we keep saying, hey, learn from Palo Alto, figure out how much water you really think you need. Don't just take the numbers from the SFPUC. We'll see if they do that. We don't get a great response from Bosca. They're not the good watchdogs that we need fiscally or environmentally. So the SFPUC has manufactured this numbers based on a design drought that they created. It's their long-term vulnerability assessment suggests that it might occur once in 8,000 years. Who plans for that? I say suggest because they don't have a return period. They kept that out, I think, because it showed how ridiculous the design drought was. And their demand projections tend to be about 20% higher than the actuals over time. So Valley Water, they just released their draft water supply management plan. They're planning for a 6-year drought, 87 to 92. The SFQC is planning for a drought that combines that with the driest 2-year period on record, 76, 77, to create a drought that's 72% more severe than Valley Waters. So we need to be asking the question, is Valley Water, are they setting themselves up to run out of water? Or is the SFPUC setting us up to pay exorbitant rates for the water that we don't need? Their alternative water supply strategy suggests we might need 92 million gallons per day of alternative water supplies. That would cost $17 billion. Now, if we use Valley Water's drought plan and we assumed reasonable demand projections, relatively what they are now, a little bit higher maybe, we could make it through with the Bay Delta plan in effect. We could make it through that drought, 6-year drought, without requiring any rationing and without developing any alternative water supplies. By using the kind of rationing that we're all used to, we could add a year to that. So the Bay Delta the Delta Reform Act of 2009 calls for code goals, ensuring a reliable water supply and restoring the Bay Delta ecosystem and the rivers that feed it, like the Tuolumne. We are in the perfect position to do that.
Thank you. That concludes your
Thank you.
time. Our next speaker is David W.
Sorry, addressed in Friday afternoon class. So thank you all for your service. I'm honored to speak to you. Similar to Peter, 50% rationing. And I first would like to say, I thoroughly admire Ms. Daly. I've had the good fortune to work with her for a number of years. I think we've been very fortunate to have you as part of Palo Alto. And I understand you might be leaving, and I'm very sad to see you go, but she's terrific. But I think this One Water plan, I would ask you guys to reject the One Water plan. And I think there are some good things to it, but it was based on 50% rationing. And that 50% rationing was based on both as Peter said, a drought model that's extremely rare and a substantial increase in demand, which we've not seen. And we've been asking the SFPUC to say, hey, give us a probability analysis for your drought model. And they absolutely refuse. And it seems like, I'm also a financial guy, it seems like a basic piece of information that any reasonable planner would want to know what the risk is. And this Councilmember Stone wrote a letter. They responded that they weren't going to provide the information. So I think the value we can get out of this is by rejecting this plan, it really sends a signal saying, hey, we really need this information. And I think that turns it into a fairly big positive that Mr. Dreckmeyer and I and many have been working for years to try to get the SFPUC to provide data so that we can make a rational determination on, do we have an issue or do we not have an issue? So that is in essence my comments. Oh, and one other thing I'd say is the once in 8,000 year event that Mr. Dreckmeyer quoted is probably at the low end from my perspective. I think it could be more like once in 70,000 years, and the long-term vulnerability assessment that the SFPUC did alludes to that. But the reason I bring this up is it also incorporated climate change. There were 9 climate scientists who went through a study session, and they said there was no significant adverse impact to the precipitation that the ecosystem would receive. It'll turn into snow to water sooner, but the SFPUC is a dam or storage-based system, so it doesn't affect it. Anyway, thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Chris T. Chris T, you may now speak. Chris, are you there?
Hello, do you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. My name is Chris Tucker. I am a member of the UAC, the Utility Advisory Commission. I'm speaking today in personal capacity, but I do want to point to what I think of as quite a gap between the report you've heard and the staff report in the package. And what's also in the package, that is the memo or the letter from the UAC. And so specifically, the summary of our work in the packet, to my mind, does not fully capture the findings and the recommendation of the UAC. It omits and it softens, and I'd even say it misrepresents some of the position that you'll see spelled out in the letter on several key points. First, the summary omits our most important recommendation. When I say our, I mean the UAC's most important recommendation, and that is the council should vote against acceptance. We spent hours reviewing the One Water Plan, and with all respect to all the effort and thought that went into it, and there's a lot of intelligence in that report, but as I'll argue, it really is based on such a faulty foundation, a premise that, as I've said at council meetings before, is based on a real lack of data and scenarios and proper modeling. When I say lack of transparency with SFPUC, I'm referring to the fact that they've simply rejected our requests for different scenarios. I've referred to the drought plan, the one sole scenario they've given us as a Frankenstein of worst case scenarios or bad case scenarios. And it's on that the whole project of One Water Plan is built. So UAC unanimously voted that this report be, well, the best you could say is put on a shelf, but rejected. And I also want to point out that the summary and staff report understates UAC's critique of the methodology. We did not have just concerns. The memo calls the methodology potentially misleading because it violates analytical principles. And so you've heard already about the 50% cutback scenario and the nature of that. But again, my most important point is that without a dialogue with SFPUC, without scenarios of different drought, storage, and supply scenarios and different demand scenarios, they've historically overestimated demand, we can't even start to use this tool. Thank you very much, and appreciate the attention to this matter.
This concludes public comment.
All right, thank you. And I want to add my thanks to Ms. Daly for detailed work and presentation, and also to our public commenters, because it's clear to me that both staff and the public have really spent a lot of time diving into this, doing analytical work, being thoughtful, and bringing to us things that are important for us to have conversation about. So I do want to entertain a robust conversation, but I first want to ask a question before I turn to my colleagues, which is, we've heard requests to, quote, reject the report. We've heard advice that they don't, like from Mr. Tucker, that they don't want us to accept the report. Staff is recommending that we receive the report and send it to council as an informational item. So just as a threshold to this conversation, could you talk a little bit about the differences between receiving, well, tell me what's the rationale for receiving?
Sure. Brad Eggleston, Public Works Director. I'll take a first crack at that and then let Carla add on if she would like to. Typically, when we do a study, we're asking council to either approve or accept it. I view those as fairly analogous. Sometimes there's a minor difference of whether it was something that would require a CEQA review to actually approve. But council can accept. And that the acceptance really connotes like an agreement with the work product. So in this instance, we are deliberately using the word receive, which is meant to be other than that. It's not rejecting, but it's also not saying that there's agreement with the work product. So that would be the difference.
Okay, so that's helpful. But we are having, a ton of work did go into this and we are having this discussion. So it seems to me that views, direction, advice, that kind of thing, you would be soliciting in addition to receiving it. Is that the request?
I think that's correct, but the intent right now is not to get feedback and go do additional work. I mean, as you heard from some of the public commenters, one aspect of some dissatisfaction is the amount of investment that's already gone into it. So I personally, I think the feedback we received from the UAC is helpful. Any other feedback is helpful. That would be used in the future as we either use the tool, the Excel tool, Miss Daly referenced, or at some point if there are triggers in the future that cause us to reopen the process and do more analysis.
Yeah, and thank you for that. I was thinking more around the advice and comment on use of the tool, because it seems like there's some question as to what degree the fatal flaw affects the tool or not, but looks like Mr. Clerk has something to add to this conversation.
Yeah, so the one water plan was helpful in regards to look at scenarios and sensitivities. And it's going to feed into what we do for our urban water management plan, which is going to be done in 2026. And the SFPUC is going to come back and look at alternative water supplies. So we'll be able to use this tool, work with our partners, and see what that looks like in the future. So there are some obviously some discussions on what those water use projections should be and how that is going through that process, through BOSCA, through conversations with frankly, Councilmember Greerstone and that. So really, we're very thoughtful in having this report not accepted, as Director Eggleston was talking about. So I think what we'd like to do is, acknowledge this report as a work product and kind of move forward, use that as a tool to move forward as we update our projections on water use and urban water management plan, as we work with SFPUC and looking at supplies and alternatives in relationship to what our priorities would be for Palo Alto.
All right, thank you. All right, well, with that, I'll turn it back to my colleagues for substantive questions and comment. Okay, Councilmember Lou.
Thank you, and I really appreciate the work that's gone into this, just across the board, including from the UAC. So coming out of this item that we're receiving, or informational report, how do we, what are the timelines and how do we decide what scenario or plan to actually adopt? I saw there was the list of timelines for 2027, 2032 for Valley Water. Do we have an intuition or a plan for what we would do, or like how we will decide from year to year when we need to prioritize things, if we do?
Sure. I don't know, this is the year that we're gonna need to look at things, but as those other planning efforts evolve, both through BOSCA and through the SFPUC, and as we kind of see if our reliability is impacted or not in the future with respect to climate change, maybe the video plan, whatever unknowns are out there that we probably can't even anticipate right now, then we might want to embark on another and more serious study regarding supplementing our current water supply.
Okay, so we read the signals on I guess on Valley Water and SFPUC, kind of updated projections over the next, well, long period, right? Like what was the next sort of key date for SFPUC?
There,
So we get the, so in
Right,
twenty
there is an
27, we'll
update.
get the alternative water supply plan.
an update to that plan, yeah. Right now, the SFUC has not recommended any large investments. So that's kind of where we are at the moment, but they, in a couple of years, are expected to provide an update. And at the same time, Bosca is doing the 2050 strategy, and we are currently working on demand forecasts as part of that study. Because San Francisco doesn't project our demand, we do. Those are provided by us.
Right, so then SFPUC at 2027, the alternative water supply plan would actually include updated projections for the shortfalls or cuts that may need to apply to different jurisdictions under different drought scenarios, right?
Correct. We, the Bosca agencies will be communicating to San Francisco what we collectively think our demand is going to look like in the future. And San Francisco will use that in their planning projections.
Right, okay, so we could strategically at that time, hopefully we have updated data between reconciling, say, Valley Water and SFPUC drought scenarios. But even if we don't at that time, we still have to make a judgment call for ourselves on what kind of alternative water supplies and scenarios to plan for. We're not bound by Bosco or SFPUC to commit to hitting certain water supplies, or are we?
We can certainly do our own planning and make our own decisions for our system. We do not have control over how the SFPC operates their system. They are the owners and the operators of that system. And so we'll have to work with them and see how this all plays out in the future.
Right. All right. So how flexible is our tool in our Excel? If we plug in the fan drought scenario cutbacks to be, can we just like plug in a number
Absolutely.
or a less severe drought and then
Yes.
see how that impacts the scores?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I think this helps me understand this more. And I appreciate the work and the framework that we've been able to develop through this process. I definitely don't think it's a waste of effort, quote unquote, paraphrasing, or that we need to reject it to make a statement. I think it's also remarkable how under the default weighted evaluation scores, conservation or the baseline scenario really don't look that bad to me, or seem pretty reasonable and good to me overall. And even more so when more weight is put on costs. So that interpretation means that even if we accept the SFP, so my interpretation of that is even if we do accept the SFPUC drought projections, the scenarios where we conserve or even the baseline scenarios are pretty viable scenarios.
I would agree with that statement. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think that that is reassuring, actually. And of course, as we get more information in the coming years and 2027 plans, 2032 Valley Water plans, we'll have more information. But overall, I think this makes sense to me and I appreciate all the work.
Thank you.
Thanks. So first, do you have to have as a backup slide our where we are on use reduction from conservation? We have this goal of a 30% reduction versus 1990, but I thought we've already exceeded that.
I do not have that slide handy.
Aren't we at, last I had heard a couple years ago, weren't we at 40% versus 1990?
I don't have the number off the top of my head, but yeah, Probably, and we would like to. Once we have a firm grip on where we sit relative to the urban water use targets that result from the new legislation, the Making Conservation California Way of Life, we would like to update that goal in the SCAP to be something like, exceed those targets by 5%, or I'm just throwing out a number. I don't know what it is yet, but we want to align those together, because 1990 was a long time ago and a lot has changed between then and now. We have, as a region, gotten much better and much more efficient in our water use despite population growth. So we do want to revise that in the next round of the SCAP.
Yeah, so I think that basically where we are, we have two baselines, 1990, and we have today's baseline. And I think it's very important that everybody understands how much reduction we've done. It goes to an implication of what remains as what's possible. It's not a determinant. And on slide, I guess it's 18, I was trying to understand that, pull it up, where it looks under scenario B and the big red bar of conservation, and this is weighted score. And is that saying that it's favorable in that score? It's not a dollar.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
the most
big
favorable.
bar is good.
Yeah, got it. Just want to make sure I was following everything. Okay. And there was a reference, I guess I wasn't aware is there a ban on turf for commercial uses? Is that what the new state law is?
The new state law is a ban on using potable water on commercial.
Okay, that's right. So
Yeah.
given that our commercial users don't have access for the most part for non-potable water, is that a de facto ban on turf? Okay.
That is a good question. And I do want to clarify that trees are an exception in there as well. So if you have a large area of non-functional turf, but there's a tree in the middle of it and the irrigation system can't be isolated to just water the tree, then keeping the tree alive is more important than not watering the turf. But yeah, in Palo Alto, for the most part, it is, we don't have recycled water out there, and so they shouldn't be watering the turf at all unless they have trees.
Well, but we do have the research park is the biggest commercial area with extensive landscaping because the low FARs in the research part. And we actually adopted back 9 years ago changes to our architectural review standards that mandated basically indigenous plants as the default on all re-landscaping. So on any redo of projects, that was already in existence, and we've kind of seen that transformation gradually in the research park. And then this new state law sounds to me like it's a de facto ban or near ban on retaining turf in the research park. Which then goes to a question, did the consultants look at, we've had these programs to incentivize turf elimination. And they've been effective, but I don't know what percentage of our really ornamental turf, which is playing field turf, has been cut back over those decades that we've had those incentives. Did the study look at that? And related to that, how much ornamental turf do we still have?
I don't think the study got into that sort of detail, and I don't have those numbers off the top of my head, but we could certainly see if we could get those for you.
Yeah, and satellite imagery, perhaps with AI, may be able to truncate the difficulty of coming up with some of those calculations that previously would have been a huge project.
Yeah, as part of making conservation a California way of life, the state did do a lot of surveying and we did get some aerial evaluations of how much turf we have, which is what the urban water use objective is, or target, it's called, I guess, target objective, is based on. They look at, you know, how much of the land is looks irrigable and how much is covered up by structures and what is the climate in the area. And then that is all used to come up with these targets that the state has given us. So we do have some data like that. I just don't have it off the top of my head.
And one of the conservation, and I'm looking at the conservation measures because I've been very impressed and touted it regionally. Just this, what I believe, my recollection has been this 40% reduction since I think 1990, which is huge. And of course it varies depending on whether we're in a drought year, a drought recovery year, or stabilized, but on average over that time. And it also begs the question of what remaining opportunities are there, and then the report seemed to indicate that there are a lot. And therefore, why do we think this that we need the 50% cutback scenario, given all the progress that we've done through conservation and the remaining opportunities for that?
Sure. So let's see, I'll try and answer that in a couple of ways. You're right, we've done a really good job in this region in achieving really efficient use of water. And the demand study that Bosca is leading right now is an effort to, you know, come up with some realistic demands over the next however many years. I can't remember what the time frame is. You know, traditionally we as planners have tried to make sure we have enough water. And so probably conservatively we do forecast maybe a little on the higher side just to make sure that we all have enough water. We are in a new world where alternative water supplies are quite expensive. We've run out of the cheap options. And so that's a lot of why we, as Bosca, are doing this demand study. And again, San Francisco does not forecast for any of us. They only forecast for their own retail customers. So the demands that they are using are demand forecasts that we, Bosca agencies, give them. So we're going through that
So
exercise
that's
right
the
now.
demand, which is different from that drought of record. That's different from it integrates with the demand.
It integrates with the amount that would need to be cut back.
Yeah, so they have a demand forecast and then they have assumptions on droughts, and that drives.
Correct.
Increase, right?
Yes, and
But they're not taking into account all the Bosca members in them.
yes, we give them what we think our demands will be. So
Are they accepting them?
yes, yeah, they don't come up with their own forecast for
Okay.
us. We provide those.
And so what's our demand forecast?
So we're in the middle of that study right now, and we're hoping to bring that back to the UAC for them to review, hopefully before the end of the year.
Oh, so we looked at this plan preceding the demand forecast.
Yes.
Explain to me why that sequence shouldn't be reversed.
Well, we started this a few years ago.
Okay, so this got done sooner, is that the answer?
Yeah, I mean, this was something that was in the SCAP directing staff to do
I understand,
this,
but
and yeah, we will, you know, it's an updatable tool, so we can go back in and update all of the assumptions.
Well, but I would assume that the demand forecast would be fundamental to driving what actions we ought to do. I mean, yeah, there's a tool that we can choose to go up and down, but it's also got premises in it that, unless I'm not understanding it, would be influenced by a demand forecast, so the. To me, it feels like the demand forecast would be a major input to this effort. As opposed to following it sequentially.
The demand, I mean, demand is definitely an important input in here, you know. Planning takes time, and we use the best demand forecast that we had at the time that we put this report together. The demand study that we're in the middle of right now is us and 25 other agencies. So we are all together doing a new demand study that is feeding into San Francisco's future projections. So yeah, we could have not done a one water plan until
Well, I think I heard
2027.
you say that they did use the previous demand forecast. I just heard you say that. So what is that? Even if we're gonna be updating it by the end of the year, that helps me understand a major premise for the whole thing.
Right. The demand forecast that we used in this plan was what we had in our urban water management plan. That was our most recent supply driven. Yeah.
Oh, what that is.
I mean, I don't know the numbers all off the top of my head, and it's a 20-year projection, but it was the best demand projection we had at the time. When San Francisco comes up with the potential cutback, they are looking at both demand and supply on their side and how they operate the system. So we took that 50% cutback as a worst case scenario, because that's what our supplier told us that they potentially would have to do. And we use that as a bookend of, this is a worst case, be it for whatever reason, a Delta plan, climate change that nobody knew how it was going to interrupt our water supply, whatever. This is a bookend. What would we do? What would this look like if we really had this scenario that we were facing in the future? And I think it provides an important bookend look at what would happen if.
Oh, the other thing on demand is pricing and cost of our water. So we're looking at downward trends from various conservation. And my memory is, even though we picked a lot of low-hanging fruit years ago, we're continuing downward. And I don't know if it's the same pace. For me, that's a really important reference point to be able to talk about making a recommendation or receiving to the council or otherwise. And I think my colleagues need to see that. I need to be reminded of it, and they may not be familiar with it. But another factor is our water, our potable water, which I joke that we water our lawns with Crystal Geyser quality water, and Crystal Geyser expense water. We have incredibly expensive water that we use for all purposes. And it's gone way up in price and is scheduled to continue to go up above the pace of inflation. As that happens, the economics and conservation become more favorable. And I want to ask, has that consideration been built into our projections, and for that matter, BOSCA and SFPUC's projections, that people have a much greater, they see their water bill and they said, oh, maybe I don't need to soak my garden quite as much as I thought.
Yeah. Sure, thank you for that. Two things. There is a table in the One Water Plan. It is table ES.2 that shows the demand forecast starting. It doesn't go all the way back to 1990. It starts at 2020. So just FYI on that. Our model did not include a price sensitivity, but the demand study that BOSCA is facilitating right now does. So it incorporates retail rate assumptions and the ability to run sensitivities for different future retail rate assumptions to see how that will impact demand.
Oh, and the other demand factor that you mentioned earlier, is the AMI metering. And so I don't know whether there are reference points to other agencies and how much impact AMI metering has had on conservation.
Yes, it does have an impact. Since that activity is already planned, it wasn't incorporated into the study, but we do anticipate that AMI will have additional conservation impacts. And that also is feeding into the study that Bosque is doing. They are looking at all the ongoing and planned conservation at every single agency, and the model adjusts demand down according to those conservation programs at each agency.
Could I just add a couple more comments? Just in terms of, when we started the One Water Plan and our Urban Water Management Plan, which was in 2020, which was last kind of updated in mid 2021. In late 2021, we started working on the One Water Plan. So we were using the most available data at the time. And we're going to do a refresh based on our requirement to do another urban water management plan. And then there's another comment you mentioned was, we have very high quality water, which Palo Alto should be very proud of in terms of getting that supply, working with Bosco and SFPUC. It also is looking at, some of the future projections of water rate increases from the wholesaler. It is just relatively the low single digits in terms of those percentages in the outward years. SFPUC does have a good credit rating. We are seeing pressures, in Santa Clara County in terms of each increased water retail rates, especially at Santa Clara Valley Water District, as they were mentioned, or Valley Water, as they were mentioned earlier by some of the discussion. So we see the projections, frankly, on the Bosco water and the SFPC water actually being, a little bit lower in terms of the wholesale cost.
One last conservation question and wrap up one. We have on slide 14, a bunch of the different conservation scenarios. And I guess incentives are real expensive, but kind of when we are moving in a direction, just like our electrification, when we're at a certain level at the earlier stage, we really want to begin to alter behavior. At a certain point in time, the good practices, maybe not best practices, become the expectation and norm, and it becomes more viable to consider mandates than just incentives. Now, there can be a mix, and there still can be certain things we incentivize, certain things we mandate, but I wanted us to make sure that we're not over dependent on incentives after a certain point in time where we're going, we really shouldn't allow certain things. And we've already done that in some regards, we have certain mandates already. So without being precise on what those would be, I just want to make sure that we aren't feeling obligated to all the conservation has to be from incentives. And so my last question on this goes to what happens with the report. If it was a recommendation to receive the report or an action to receive the report and not to accept or reject the report, I want to get a better clarification of what that means staff would do with the report, including premises like on the worst case scenario, and other things that we've talked about, and the things that the UAC brought up. And I'll say that it's unusual that we get a unanimous recommendation from the UAC against a staff recommendation, and I don't want to dismiss their recommendation. And it sounds like, in a way, the option to receive is a reflection of listening to the UAC. But tell us again what you do with this if we say receive, versus if we were to say, we don't accept it.
Sure, I think, we would, I mean, we listened to the UAC as well, and, we, if and when the council wanted to, or we felt that the council should make a decision around reliability of our water supply and consider some alternative or some regional partnership opportunity, we would modify the tool to the best of our ability to take into account the concerns expressed by the UAC and bring that back with whatever recommendation we felt was prudent to the council.
Can I just add that, you know, the value of going to the UAC with even the scoping of the plan, getting their feedback on it, you know, whether we accept the report or receive the report, I think receiving is the right way to go based on their feedback. And again, staff was not acting for any action in a part of any of these recommendations. It was a tool. The landscape has changed from 2021, even to when we were finalizing that report. You know, for example, the Santa Clara Valley Water District really started not focusing on doing advanced water treatment at our treatment plant anymore, and really diverted the resources looking at the larger wastewater treatment plant in the South Bay as an option. So things have changed, right? And we'll make adjustments. And that's the great feedback and the process we have and the tool that we can use, right? So we can look at those tools, we can look at the costs, we can look at the benefits, we can look at, you know, acceptance, we can look at if there's energy use, what that means for us in that regard as well. So it's really a tool for us to use. Again, we're not looking for any alternative water supply right now. And we'll use that to inform our decisions and maybe find other partnerships, you know, potentially as the SFPUC looks at all the type of potential supplies.
Well, yeah, what I'm still struggling with is that acceptance says we're good with you using the tool, even if the UAC and we may have concerns with some aspects of the tool. So that's kind of the struggle. It's my questions point. I think that there is probably a lot more remaining in opportunities for conservation. And we can continue on our trend. And we don't have to think so much about relying on the recycled water, even though there may be good opportunities. We have one that's in the works, but you know, the tool does emphasize the conservation, so it's not in conflict with that. But I still have concerns with kind of what you're saying is acceptance is endorsing use of the tool, even if the UAC had concerns over some of the methodologies there. And I'm not saying I agree with all of their concerns, but I do feel a dilemma on what it means to accept it and what that's telling staff to do with it going forward.
Can I just clarify that the request is for receiving the report rather than?
So, excuse me, or even receiving is this implication that staff goes for it. Yeah, I mean, thank you for that, but what I will say is that from what I've heard, receiving is being construed by staff as accepting and authorizing using it going forward. If you're gonna use it as a tool, how do you do that if it hasn't been accepted?
Yeah, well, just to reiterate something that I meant to convey before, I think the distinction is that receiving versus accepting is acknowledging that there were a lot of concerns expressed about it. And the fact that staff, before they use the tool, would be going back and reviewing those and trying to respond to them as best we should.
Okay.
rather than accept, but potentially meaning, okay, everyone's fine with those tool as is.
All right, well, thank you. Instead of starting where I was, I want to pick up with that, just so we can kind of stay on that topic. Because I did notice, whatever slide had the staff recommendation, that in addition to receiving the one water plan, staff is recommending you receive it and the associated letter from the UAC. So to me, that implies a request that we keep both in mind as you go forward, so that the one, being the UAC letter, will inform any future use of the tools in the plan. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, because I think that is important. It's, you know, we have a group of well-informed folks who've worked hard, and I agree with Councilmember Burt that it's rare to see this posture, things coming to us like this. So if it's an and that will continue to be evaluated as decisions about using the tool are made, that would be important to me. If it's understood that way, I'm more comfortable with it. But for my education, just understanding, one of the things I'm still struggling with on this point is, whereas I appreciate that this is a flexible tool, that you can change a lot of inputs, and I really appreciate it, the sensitivity analysis. I take it, is that generated from changing inputs in that tool? Is that an
Yes.
example? Okay. Because that was very interesting to see, well, if we change the weighting of cost, or we change the weighting of reliability, it really does change the outcome in terms of, you know, preference for one versus the other. So at the risk of exposing being dense, what I'm struggling with is whether this 50% premise that's in question, with the design drought from SFPUC, whether that is something that changing some inputs can address, or whether that is a fatal flaw throughout the structure of the tool. Does staff have a view on that?
Well, my view is not a fatal flaw of the structure of the tool. We can make different assumptions about the reliability of our existing supply.
And that's a nod we can.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, well, that's important. So I did want to go back, though. I have a specific question. Because it's on slide 15, which is the plan project slide, which I was not aware of. And I'm very interested in this. So this is apparently a current plan to modify the 2 groundwater wells. And you mentioned the challenges in doing so, that there's the different chemical treatment at SFPUC versus us, and that, so, but, you know, emptying pipes and things that would have to be done. And I think you said that blending it would require additional work, but also additional budget, so there's no, so I'm trying to understand, it says city planning to do it, but I think there's no budget for it yet, so could you tell me a little bit more about where we are on that?
But we don't have it in our, sorry, we don't currently have this in our CAP, but yes, we would need to do some work. A good thing Alan's here. He's
Sorry, the engineer in me. So right now we disinfect with free chlorine. And several years ago, SFPUC and all of the other water retailers, for water quality reasons, went to chloramines, which is basically chlorine and ammonia. So we would have to change that type of disinfectant such that they would be blending and we wouldn't have water quality issues in the system. So that's one of the projects that we'll be bringing forward in terms of, if we wanted to blend, is have these wells more or less retrofitted so that we would have chloramines, which is what they do on most of the regional water treatment plants in the bay.
So this project and moving forward with it is not affected by this one water plan. This is pre that, but moving forward with it, to the degree we do and choose to allocate capital budget and plan it out, could impact the future alternatives we would choose with respect to drought and conservation measures. Is that right?
it would make it easier to use groundwater on a more regular basis if the council chose to do that.
And so with that, things like this, Mr. Kurtori was just mentioning all the different things that have happened and would happen that would affect decision-making going forward. And I assume how this plays out and other measures that we take. Councilmember Port was mentioning various things we have done and would do. I assume this is part of the landscape that could change the selection, the alternatives and the selection of them.
It's possible. I mean, there are a lot of complications with using groundwater. You know, it's maybe not the most reliable supply either. Valley Water often has, requested cutbacks more severe than the SFPUC. They rely on the State Water Project, which, often doesn't yield a lot of water to them in drought situations. And it's also getting quite expensive. You have to pay a groundwater pumping fee to Valley Water for every bit of water that we use here in Palo Alto. So it's a minor, I would say it would play a minor part in the attractiveness of that supply.
I'm sorry. Alan Kurtori, Georgia Utilities. So when we look at the groundwater wells, yes, the Valley Water manages a groundwater basin. They get both state and federal and local recharge. There's not a lot of groundwater pumping, frankly, in the area where we've come from in Palo Alto. So they will look at those groundwater levels to see. And in a drought, you would see potentially more folks using groundwater than others. Again, for our purposes, I think looking at groundwater in drought, that's something we'll take a look at in terms of some other alternatives. Water conservation always, if you look at it through historical times, it's really kind of your best action.
Yeah, thank you for that. And so was this project just sort of an exemplary project of what's planned already, or are there others, or is it kind of one of the few?
Really one of the few, yeah.
Okay, so we don't have a lot of current plans that would make a huge impact on the future decisions. Okay. Then I also wanted to mention that the slide, I think it was 20, on illustrative bill impacts, which I understand has a lot of, assumptions built in. And so you're not positing this as the exact numbers we would get in the future if we were to adopt, or were to implement these portfolios. But I think this kind of I'd really appreciate you doing this and giving us a feel for it, because I think this is really important and going to be very important to our residents, obviously. The bill differences, and it's just really interesting to see how things that qualitatively you might not think make such a big difference, that quantitatively might have more or less of a financial impact than one would expect. I mean, I was struck by the fact that, for example, between E&G, Palo Alto DPR versus regional DPR, it's like a 50% difference, even though it's smaller, on the smaller end of the additional dollars. So this kind of modeling, when we get more specific in our plans, like we do in the future, I think is something that I'd like to see more of. So that's a good thing there. So I was interested in the discussion with Councilmember Byrd about, our demand information going to SFPUC. They get kind of, chicken and egg, cart horse, like how do we sort this out? And I guess one of the things I'm just asking generically is, we're aware, of course, that Bosca, through at the impetus of our representative, Councilmember Stone, wrote to SFPUC asking for information and such. And is that the kind of thing that I mean, would that information have been helpful, would be helpful? Is that the kind of thing that we should continue to encourage? Or do you have any views generically on whether you're getting what you need from SFPC?
So, the Bosca general manager also sent a letter
Right.
to, the SFUC, and, SFUC, is working with Bosca on those issues, so I think there is active conversation happening there, and that, the SFUC's position is that they work through Bosca, not so much with individual agencies, and so that's what I see happening.
Okay, I was under the impression that SFPC was not being as forthcoming with Bosca as they might have hoped, but I may not have the most current information. I guess, even if we think that's the right conduit, just whether, to what degree we would add, any encouragement, to that, I mean, any noise about it, if it's something that we feel is inadequate in terms of a response, as a customer, that's one of my questions. Do we feel any need to do that? Or even just invite them here to talk to us. I just don't know where you are in terms of thinking that we need any more.
Just a little background and history, the UAC had some comments, Councilmember Gerstone provided a letter to SFPUC, and there was some follow-up in regards to Bosca as the representative for all the member agencies in terms of additional information, and kind of confirming that that they're looking and modeling different supply regimes, looking at drought savings, getting some scenarios and worksheets. So there really was a dialogue in terms of that, and back in June, as we were looking at our tier 2 and other items. So I don't want to commingle some of those discussions, but yes, Bosca is absolutely involved. There's good coordination in that regard, and there'll be further coordination as we move forward.
And I guess that's the important part is, it's hard at arm's length to keep straight all of the who said what to whom when, and who gave what information to whom when, and is it what we need or is it not? But I just think that, to the extent that, we as a city feel we may not be getting enough information or through Bosca or whatever, that, anything we can do to, encourage that. Because there, these concerns were raised. We either want to just allay them or, refute them, whatever. But I think we need to make sure that we have all the information we need to make the best decisions we can down the road. And it sounds like that conversation is ongoing, but were it not, I would like, for a chance for our council to perhaps, hear from them or weigh in or something. So I'm more just inviting staff to use us to do that, to get what we need as a city, to serve our customers. Anything more from my colleagues?
Yeah, one follow-up to a question you had on the water pumping. Ellen, you alluded to high valley water recharge fees or as a result of pumping. So
The pumping charge that the Valley Water, levies if groundwater is pumped in the county.
and that's based on their recharge costs.
And their water supply cost, so yes, yeah.
So I recall about a dozen years ago, we had a multi-jurisdictional kind of initiative that I think Peter Dreckmeyer and I can't recall who else is involved, that led us to have additional geotechnical studies and understand our groundwater, which we had traditionally assumed was connected with essentially the groundwater system in north or south of us in the valley. And the conclusion I recall was that we realized it was much more isolated than we had assumed. And therefore, we're not benefiting our depletion from our groundwater pumping in Palo Alto would not require Valley Water to have the expense of replenishing, nor would we, frankly, do we benefit from their replenishment. are you aware of those studies? And it doesn't mean that Valley Water doesn't have a policy to charge us, but it may mean that we want to advocate a revisiting of that and require that it be based on a cost basis as opposed to some kind of one size fits all that doesn't fit in the far north of the county.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. And in fact, we did some more work on this in our Northwest County recycled water
Strategic plan.
strategic plan. Thank you, Carmen. Get that whole long title out there. Valley Water does its own, what they call it the zone of benefit study. So they look at the whole county and determine which areas benefit from their recharge and which don't. They completed one of those not very long ago, a year or two ago, and that study did conclude, their study concluded that this part of the county still benefited. Stanford has been kind of at the forefront of this debate. Stanford pumps quite a lot of groundwater. They,
And I think they
as
were
you
in that
probably
group now, I
know,
think.
yeah. And I need to get up to speed on where they are, and they're arguing with Valley Water on that. But yeah, thanks for bringing that up. It
I mean,
might be worth re-engaging.
As we know, Valley Water charges our ratepayers for water conveyance or potable water that
Yes.
we don't,
Our the property owners, it's a
Property
property
owners,
tax. Yes.
not our city, that we don't use at all. And the closest they could come for a justification was that is that we now have an interconnect, and in an emergency, like a quake, we'd get that benefit. But they left out the fact that they would also get the benefit. It's reciprocal. So there's no tilting of the benefit toward us. So I'd be interested in seeing what's the basis for their basically their pump fees being the same here as where would they clear that elsewhere in the county clearly benefits from it. And as well as what Stanford's determined. Thank you.
Thank you. So staff has recommended that we receive both the One Water Plan and the letter from the UAC. May I have a motion on that? Or I can so move that, we receive it.
Second.
Absent any further discussion, would you call the roll?
Councilmember Burt,
Yes.
Chair Vinker,
Yes.
Councilmember Loop,
Yes.
motion carries 3-0.
All right, thank you, and thank you to the public, and thank you, Ms. Daly. I think this certainly elucidated an awful lot of things that we needed to elucidate, so thank you so much for that. All right. We will move on to our second action item. It's 3:00, I know. All right, review and discussion design guidelines for multifamily EV charger program. So welcome. Are you the staff now? Please go ahead.
And Rachel DeFranco from the Facilities Department is going to give our presentation at this time.
Thank you. As the slides get flipped, so Rachel DeFranco, I'm the Utilities Program Services Manager in our Resource Management Division. Thank you for having us today. So what we're going to be presenting today is the design guidelines for a successor to our current multifamily EV charging program. This is really, in alignment with the vision under the SCAP to promote and enhance our efforts around electric mobility and EV charging infrastructure. So we want to present to you what our thought process is here to really expand our breadth and impact in this area. Next slide. So a little bit of background, our EV rebate program, or EV 1.0 that we're currently operating under, has been operating since 2017. And some of the successes that we've had into that program, we have installed EV charging infrastructure at 26 multifamily properties. There's also been some non-residential, nonprofit properties where we've installed EV charging infrastructure as well. But we are currently only incentivizing multifamily properties at this point. So I'm going to be focusing on the multifamily impacts. of those 26 properties, a total of 325 chargers have been installed. And that serves 1,324 residential units. So we have, close to 11,000 multifamily units in Palo Alto. So we have provided access to charging at over 12% of our multifamily properties at this point. That doesn't mean that every resident has a charger in their assigned parking space, but that there is charging on site at their property that they do have access to. Some of the limitations of our current program. So there are 577 multifamily properties of 3 units or more. If you also include duplexes, that number is higher. And so just looking at those 3+ unit multifamily properties, our current program has served only 4.5% of those properties. We have spent $1.5 million in incentives on those 26 projects. So if we were to extrapolate and look at the rate at which we have spent incentives so far on those 26 projects to serve all almost 600 multifamily properties of 3 or more units, it could cost us 25 to 34 million in incentives, assuming the same structure under our current EV program, which we don't have the funding to do. So we need a new financial model to scale our program. Next slide. In order to really understand, what is currently working and what could work better with our program model, we had a number of conversations with electric vehicle service providers and EV contractors, electrical contractors that do work in the EV space. So we had 9 different companies that we talked to, multiple meetings with some of them, really focusing on understanding how their projects are currently funded. And they're really typically incentive heavy projects. They said, for the most part, about 2/3 of the project costs are covered by incentives, and they don't typically move forward unless that's the case. So we heard from them suggestions on a lot of potential regulatory changes that we could be thinking about in the next version of our program, allowing separate service for EV charging. So currently they are focused primarily on getting EV chargers installed in multifamily properties using a house meter. Sometimes they also can get those chargers connected to the individual unit meters, but it typically is a lot more difficult to do that in an existing property and more expensive. But there are situations in PG&E territory where they have installed chargers attached to a separate EV meter and found that to be a really good way to make some of these larger projects happen in particular. So that was one recommendation that we heard loud and clear. We also heard that, sometimes the commercial panels that they need to install for EV charging are more difficult to come by, they're more expensive. And allowing the use of residential type panels for the EV circuits could be something to really help cut costs and move projects forward more quickly. We also have a fairly unique requirement in Palo Alto around emergency power shutoff switches that need to be installed for any EV charging installations at multifamily non-residential properties. So we heard some, feedback on how to make that requirement a little bit more easy to implement. We have heard, also that managed charging in a lot of cases could help us to avoid transformer upgrades. And typically utilities engineering looks at the total potential load of EV charging when an installation is being proposed. And so they're factoring in that total potential max load of the EV charging stations, not factoring in any management of that load that could be happening through software. And so if we were to and we're working on, really looking at ways to allow this, and specifically if we have a breaker between the chargers and the main panel that prevents that max load from ever occurring in alignment with the load management, we're allowing those systems to go forward and the load to be calculated accordingly right now. We're also, looking at how can we enable pre-wiring of future installations without impacting those transformer load calculations. So if pre-wiring is done, depending on the type of equipment that's installed. Sometimes load will also be factored in. And, you know, that could impact the need for a new transformer or the sizing of that new transformer. And then finally, you know, hearing some feedback around if we had some pre-approved equipment setups, plans that we could really kind of move through permitting over the counter, that could really help the process as well. And then finally, you know, one of the things that we discussed in depth is, you know, how do we move our projects forward? How do we scale the size of those projects and the number of those projects with limited resources for incentives moving forward? And so we discussed, you know, if financing through an on-bill repayment type of option could be an alternative to incentives, and we heard that that could be quite compelling given the right terms from all of the companies that we engaged with. Next slide. So through those conversations and a lot of the analysis of our current EV 1.0 program, we have put forward some guidelines for EV program 2.0 that were presented to you today. And the vision is to really meet the current EV charging demands, anticipate market and policy-driven charging trends that we're seeing happen now and into the future, and then also inspire future electric charging demand, specifically in our multifamily customer segment. We want to make sure that EV charging in the multifamily space is convenient, affordable, and accessible to residents. We would like to pilot financial designs that can be deployed community-wide with little additional city funding, enable a wide range of participation from our EV charging providers. So there's, you know, EV charging providers that are selling equipment. There's ones that are really looking at kind of managing charging. And then there's, you know, contractors that are, you know, just really electrical contractors, but highly involved in the EV charging space. And we want to make sure that they all have the ability to participate in the program moving forward. And we also want to make sure that we have options for all sizes and types of multifamily properties. There's small, locally owned multifamily properties. There's larger multifamily properties that are managed by large property management companies. There's condo and townhome associations that, you know, are managed by an HOA board. And all of those have very different decision-making processes in being able to move the project forward. Next slide. So the financial design for the EV 2.0 program, we really want to make sure that the program is cost effective and scalable. So again, using financing as a way to get projects through rather than upfront incentives. We're calling this charging as a service. That could also reduce the impact to property owners' balance sheets, because if we had an on-bill repayment for an investment into EV charging infrastructure and that was repaid over time through the utility bill, that actually would be off balance. And so the property owners and asset managers feel like, you know, it could be a lot easier to get a project through because it's not being looked at as traditional debt. If needed, you know, incentives could help repay the financing and should eventually be repaid back over time, and with the exception of affordable housing, where we would want to still subsidize these projects to help those properties in particular. And we have 2 affordable housing properties that have already installed EV charging and 3 more that we're expecting completed by the end of the year. We're really looking at repayment coming from the beneficiaries of the infrastructure. So the beneficiaries, you know, primarily are the drivers who are able to then plug in their vehicles on site, and also the landlords, because this is now a new amenity to their property that could help retain and bring in new residents, or in the case of an HOA, you know, the condo owners are going to be much happier with the ability to charge their vehicles. And, you know, when we're dealing with HOAs right now, a lot of the time there's, you know, a handful of condo owners that are bugging the HOA board and, you know, trying to figure out a way to make this work for everybody. So where a property would have to pay a share of the upfront costs if the financing didn't cover the full project, we would want to make sure too that upfront investment could be repaid in a reasonable amount of time. So the terms of the loan could be adjusted perhaps accordingly. But we also want to make sure that our charging rates are attractive to customers, kind of base cost for providing electricity at the retail rate is 22 cents a kilowatt hour. So, really thinking about what could be a reasonable amount to add as a surcharge to a bill, while still allowing those tenants or, owners of multifamily units to pay a rate that makes sense for them to charge on site. And then really focusing on, doing projects where demand supports it. So are there enough EV drivers on site to install, a certain amount of infrastructure now? How do we plan to scale that infrastructure out as more EV drivers are added? And if there's, not enough demand, then looking at potentially some other alternatives. Next slide. So to make sure that the program is going to meet a wide range of providers, we really want to focus on accommodating the installation of new EV meters or EV service, but also continuing to have the ability to utilize house meters or existing unit meters where it might make more sense to do so. So being flexible in the design that way. Looking at supporting additional future EV charging through the installation of infrastructure, while at the same time avoiding service upgrades. So if we were to install, say, 10 chargers now, but put in 20 additional make-ready spaces, looking at, the current load of the property, the expected additional load from those EV chargers that are being installed, and then the future load, if those make-ready spaces also have EV chargers, and figuring out through load management, how to best keep that load from hitting a peak that would require a transformer upgrade, or if we are doing a transformer upgrade, that transformer is going to suffice for whatever the future final build out is. We also want to make sure that we're sizing appropriate to the site needs. So this is really where, if there's enough demand currently to put in charging at all parking spaces, installing those charging stations at assigned parking spaces when adoption levels are high. If adoption levels are lower at a multifamily property, it may not make sense to do so. So we might want to focus a project on getting chargers into shared parking spaces, for instance. And then if, there's significant site constraints or adoption levels are really low, or if the cost of doing a project on site is just, really not palatable for the property manager, looking at ways that we might still be able to serve those multifamily properties through curbside charging or through EV charging hubs installed on nearby locations that are really focused on serving the multifamily segment. Next slide. So then finally, we have some kind of complementary design elements. So we want to make sure through the emphasis on EV charging infrastructure that we're still supporting alternative transportation options, that we're doing, robust community engagement around the benefits of driving an EV and EV charging. We want to be thinking about how to make sure projects are getting through our own processes in the city quickly and facilitating that process and streamlining as much as possible. And then making sure that the projects are aligned with our grid reliability and resiliency goals. So to hit all of those things, we're looking at including e-micromobility charging when we're doing EV charging deployments, and actually Alta Housing that just completed an EV charging installation included some L1 outlets next to their EV chargers where people could plug in e-bikes as well. So that's kind of the first pilot there. Looking at secure bike parking facilities as well, making sure e-bike charging is done in a safe way. We've heard concerns from fire about, bringing e-bike batteries inside units. So thinking about how do we make sure that we get those into locations where they are safe and secure. And also looking into, bike share, car share opportunities, and that might be, specifically relevant for EV charging hubs where, those could go in at a city community center or maybe even a church parking lot.
And then, when it comes to customer engagement, offering education, outreach, and customer facing services, really supporting projects through EV advising. We have an EV technical assistance program right now. It's kind of revamping that. And looking at, what are the things that customers need the most, kind of at the beginning of a project and then ongoing. Also really focusing workshops and other outreach and engagement to bring in landlords and HOAs and asset managers into the conversation. We haven't been doing targeted workshops like that yet, so that's a big focus. And then thinking about kind of ongoing events that are more community facing, so e-mobility events, EV showcases, which we have been offering, continuing those, and then looking at other income qualified offerings in particular to help lower income folks make the transition to electric mobility. Fostering updates to our EV policies and processes. So looking at our building and zoning codes and thinking about ways that we can continue to streamline our permitting processes and support projects getting through some of the city red tape. And then finally, when it comes to grid reliability and resiliency, making sure that we're incorporating low power charging options, load management strategies, and demand response technologies into these projects wherever feasible. And then I think the final slide is just the staff recommendation is that the Climate Action and Sustainability Committee recommend to City Council to adopt our design guidelines for the successor to the current multifamily EV charging program.
Before we finish the staff presentation, I'm realizing that I didn't get a working group feedback slide set up. So we probably want to talk a little bit about the feedback. Do you want to share, and I'll jump in if there's anything more that I had in my notes.
If there's anything, if you want to start,
share
then I'll
from my
add.
notes if you like. Yeah, vice versa. Sounds good. Thanks.
I have links like
Yep. So, my takeaway was that so first off, we only had 2 working group members, one of whom was a UAC commissioner. The feedback we got was that this set of guidelines really covered every topic that the 2 attendees could think of. And there was a mention of financing being a positive approach, looking at an interest rate buy down. I think that's certainly in our structures like that are the sort of thing we're thinking about. There was an appreciation of the workshops or complexes that already have EV charging, which is something we've already started implementing. We talked a little bit about how to schedule shared EV chargers and talked about some of the tools, some of the products that are out there for people to use. There was some surprise actually about the e-bike batteries being plugged in inside. And so some discussion about that. And then there was quite a bit of discussion about the need for fast charging versus slow charging. And I think it was a very lively discussion, and there was maybe some acknowledgement that there may be some folks for whom fast charging, that there are a lot of different ways of approaching electrifying your vehicles, and that different people have very different day-to-day lives, and that there are cases where at least some people may feel that a fast charger is really a necessity for them and their family. So no resolution there, but a very interesting and lively discussion.
Yeah.
Did I miss anything?
I think that was comprehensive.
All right, well, thank you very much.
I'm sorry. I hate to keep interrupting.
Go for it.
But I just wanted to make sure that after council approval, the design guidelines, I think where we're headed, unless we find other aspects of the program that need council approvals. We already have a budget approved for this in the FY26 budget. with these design guidelines, we would ideally move forward to implement, although it's possible we may find that additional approvals like contract approvals are needed.
Great, great. All right, well, thank you for that comprehensive report, Rachel, sorry, what she was.
DeFranco.
Mr. Franco, thank you so much. That was really terrific. You know, it's just, and I'm so glad to see us moving forward with multifamily. There's a whole equity aspect there that's important. And so 2.0, perfect. Let's start and see if we have any public comment on this item.
The chair, I've not received any public comment cards, but I would like to ask if there's any members of the public on Zoom that would like to speak on this topic, to raise your hand. I see none.
Okay, all right, well, with that, we will close public comment and I'll bring it back to the dais. Councilmember Byrd.
Well, thank you. This is a real positive report, you know, as we've been moving from our earlier piloting of programs to beginning to have a grasp of what full scale would be, even if we recognize that we're still going to learn more as we go in this transition period. But this really hits a lot of the areas that over the last couple of years we've heard from well, emerging technologies, problems and potential solutions that were suggested, and it looks like it's really coming together. I was real glad to hear that that kind of the movement toward managed load systems is being embraced. And I don't know if everybody knows, but there are several companies that have been moving forward on this that like I'm familiar with, where they can install a bank of conduit, and for every 2 spaces have one shared low-cost box that might include a level 1 and a level 2 or whatever the mix is. But they only have to install the boxes as they are seeing demand. And so it allows kind of for a scaling, as the report says, look, what's needed now is all we want to do. You don't want to get ahead of the curve too far. That's just really exciting, because that was and this change on not requiring a transformer upgrade if we recognize it's a managed load and put a breaker in. Putting that in under our current rules, we haven't changed them yet, right? Or have we?
Well, so utilities engineering is willing to factor, you know, that load management if we have that,
Okay.
that hardwired, you know,
So
solution right the right
now,
there.
Fairly recently, even though those were smart systems that said, oh no, we're not going to utilize every one of these stations at once, we'll meter it. We didn't have a system to be able to recognize that, and still triggered a transformer upgrade. So that's a big breakthrough. I did want to ask on the curbside charging, which there are places, both small multifamily, where there just may not be opportunities to install some of this, and we have single family homes that have no driveways downtown north, and places where I've known people who said, I can't get an EV because I have no way to charge it. So where do we stand on piloting the curbside?
Right now, we're looking at the pilots that are happening in the city of Alameda municipal utility territory, as well as SFPUC territory. It's actually SFMTA that's running that program, and understanding kind of what are some of the challenges that they're running into with curbside charging, what are some of the, you know, best practices and opportunities. So our thought process around it is it could enable us to drop off of, you know, existing overhead lines. But there are concerns around, you know, kind of the right of way, and if we are putting in curbside chargers in areas where bikes are also being you know, coming through and it's a like, you know, bicycle boulevard type of situation, make sure that,
Wouldn't be
we're
in
not
that
like,
location, yeah.
you know, fighting over who kind of gets the right there. And then there's also concerns around, you know, the cords themselves and tripping hazards and vandalism. So all of those are things that, you know, I'm keeping a pulse on as I'm seeing what's happening in Alameda and San Francisco.
Well, a couple comments, on the bike lanes and things, we either prohibit parking in bike lanes or we don't, so I don't see how this would change that. So I don't, that doesn't sound, unless I'm misunderstanding something, that doesn't sound like an issue.
Yeah, you want to comment?
It's more about making sure that we're tracking where bike lanes are being planned, so we don't go and do
Oh,
an expensive investment there and
good enough.
interfere with
Okay.
other operations.
And then, and I've been tracking this curbside for 9 years or so and looking forward to it. I would like to see us do some of our own piloting as soon as possible. The technology has been getting done, not just in the Bay Area, it's been getting done elsewhere in the US and certainly longer ago, in Europe. And one of the great things is that, you know, as we've converted our light poles to LED, we're not pulling the same watts that we used to for the lighting. And my understanding is that there's capacity in a lot of our light poles are actually, I don't know, if they're 208 or 220, but they would accommodate a level 2 charger, whereas I had previously understand, so we were only like 110. Is that, John, did you have something?
I think we looked at this a couple of years ago and didn't find adequate capacity on the light poles.
Oh,
unfortunately.
interesting.
Yeah, you know, I know LA did something like that, but they had some bizarrely high amount of capacity assigned to their light poles. And I don't know what utility decision resulted in that, but they had a lot of capacity and we just don't.
All right, well, I'd be interested in finding out more about that offline. Also, Rachel, you mentioned, I thought you said 4.5% of our multifamily units are being served, but
Yeah, so the percentages there were, well, you know, we, in the 26 properties that we've installed charging through our incentive program, the number of units of all those properties represents over 12% of, you know, total residents in
Right.
multifamily properties. The number of properties though,
Oh, okay.
26 properties is only
Good enough. That
4.5%
clarifies
of
that.
properties, which means that there's a lot of smaller properties out there that have yet to be served.
and you know, as we, I don't know if you're really looking at kind of bifurcating the approaches, that here are the ones favored by the smaller properties and here are the ones, or by the larger ones. You know, as you mentioned, kind of the pilot that's on the curbside that's going on, goes to this whole issue of where are places that we can not have to be the ones who are figuring everything out. And as you're probably aware, Norway has it's a 90% EV sales now. And so they're really at the forefront of this full-scale adoption. And we have, are you familiar with the Nordic Innovation House that we have here in Palo Alto?
Go ahead.
Oh, so it represents Norway, Sweden, and Finland, and it's just right down the street here. And they are very active in sharing technologies that they've developed, companies that are at the forefront, all of that. And so we've had some collaborations with them actually through our sustainability program. And so they would be, I believe, more than willing to share any of their learning experiences with us. And then also in discussions with multifamily developers, like Summerhill Homes, they have teams that are on their sustainability programs, and much of it is on EV charging, but not entirely. And they're very willing to share kind of their experiences, where an interesting thing was that they explained that they no longer have to be prodded to have EV charging. Now it's mostly new units, but they're saying the market demand is insisting on having that. new tenants say, no, I've got to have that capability, which really tips things from us having to push it to that the market is now demanding, and we don't have to incentivize it so much. Then I was really glad to see also your reference to outreach and education, because the solutions can be there. We can have right initiatives, but if we still have property managers and contractors that are stuck in the 20th century, we're not going to get there. And so really providing them with those flyers that lay out, here's what we understand about best practices, here's what we're doing to facilitate, but also they don't necessarily know what products are out there and everything, and what's emerging that is available. Lastly, so out of all the set of next initiatives, some of them, or at least the one on the managed load, resulting in no longer requiring transformer upgrades. Are there others? I guess I'd like to understand what's the timeline for these different major initiatives. Some that sound like it's already happened, some might be in the works, some on the horizon. Do we have a schedule?
So I can say, some of the things that we're already doing, we've been offering EV workshops and EV showcases at properties where charging has been installed recently or is about to be installed, to really engage the residents more around, the benefits of EV ownership. Here's these chargers that you're going to see. This is how, they can benefit you, cost saving opportunities. So we weren't doing that kind of on-site engagement previously. There's been ongoing conversations and improvements with utilities engineering and development services permitting to really streamline processes. We have a permit checklist now for contractors to help them through the process and really navigating the requirements that we have here in Palo Alto. So some of those things have been ongoing.
But is there a schedule for implementation, and align with that schedule what we are projecting as the impacts? And when?
Yeah, do you want to talk on scheduling, Jonathan?
Why don't you jump in?
Okay.
Take a shot, I'll jump in.
Yeah, so when it comes to the rolling out of financing, what we're hoping to do is come up with the model. Jonathan's been doing a lot of modeling on the potential costs that we might think about in terms of a adder to bills. And so there's some opportunities where we could work with a financing partner to run a pilot, and some of the budget that we already have set aside we could utilize for that. So that'll take a process.
But I'm meaning taking this set of half a dozen or whatever initiatives that are going on and saying, okay, here's the one, we did this one on this date, we've changed our code or whatever, our practice. Here's this one, and here's the first phase, second phase date. And within each of those, and we say, and we're projecting that this is the approximate impact that we will have. Maybe we don't have a great sense of that, but attempt to essentially tie performance metrics to a plan and a schedule for that plan, with a real appreciation that, that in many of these cases, the metrics on what we're projecting will be the outcomes are best guesses, but we still should be attempting to do that. And as we get more knowledgeable, we refine that.
Yeah, it's definitely an iterative process, and some of that is happening right now, like through budgeting processes. But Jonathan, do you want to comment?
Yeah, we're building that timeline right now, and there's a lot listed here. These are all so what's going to be interesting about this pilot is that because of the amount of budget we're dealing with, and the fact that the capital is going to have to be provided from our city budgets as opposed to from a third party, it means that this is going to be somewhat limited in size. And so what we're really going to have here are a series of tools that we can use, and which tools we use will depend on what types of interest gets generated. So if we have interest from a building owner, for example, or a few building owners right in an area, who don't have a lot of EV drivers, then the tool to use might be something like a mobility hub nearby or an on-street charging pilot. If we have someone with a few someone call us up and they have a few drivers in the building, but not quite enough to justify a full space by space installation, well, then maybe we're looking at an on-site charger installation. And if, we see a surge in interest after that on-site charger installation, then maybe that it gets expanded into a full, like, charging as a service type, space by space installation. So we don't want to, I think, lay out metrics for every single one of these tools, but we want to lay out some general metrics for our program goals. And we will do that as we start to lay out what's possible within the budget and, look at our financing partner negotiations, as Rachel was saying.
And last question on the funding. I'm not clear which of these initiatives that require real funding as opposed to saying a rule change or whatever, a policy change, would be from utility funds versus general fund.
The budget in the FY26 budget, it's $3.1 million from the low carbon fuel standard funds.
Okay. And the low carbon fuel standard funds flow to which?
So
I forget.
this comes from the utility generates power for
But then when we
EV
get
chargers,
that fund,
we get.
it goes to general fund or it goes to utility?
It's a reserve, it's held in the utility funds, but it's a special revenue.
Yeah.
That's really meant to be dedicated for electric vehicles.
That's okay. I just didn't know if it went to you.
That's where it's held.
That's where it's held. Okay, very good. Thank you. And just, I'm just real pleased that we're just now moving into a real strategic approach on this. It's for at cutting edge, I think, at least for here.
Thank you, and I concur with really all of Councilmember Bird's points. And I'll just note that I live on a building in Sheridan, and we're about to get EV chargers installed in our guest spots, and we're really grateful for the city's work. So we'll kick off at least some kind of pilot in FY 2026. When would the existing program ramp down?
So the existing program is providing incentives on a per charger basis, 8,000 per L2 charger up to 10 chargers. We have, we serve 26 multifamily properties. We have about the same number of properties in the queue right now at various stages of planning. And so some of those properties may be more interested in the charging as a service model, and others, they've already submitted an application reserved for rebate. They want to continue that process. So, I think right now the vision is we continue to, serve the properties that are in the queue, taper off of incentives over time, get more properties interested in the charging as a service, pilot that, work through any challenges, kinks, improve, best practices, and then transition into charging as a service as the option for our support around charging infrastructure. And that process will take time. And we're gonna, it'll be very dependent on when we actually can roll out the financing as a pilot initially. But we're talking about, the SCAP 2026, 27 work plan. So this is really, what we've identified as rolling out EV 2.0, rolling out charging as a service financing as, kind of the main areas of focus in the new work plan.
Got it. Okay. I'm wondering if there's a marketing opportunity with some of the properties that would be more suited to 1.0 to say, in the next 3 months, it's your last chance to get in the queue. And if there is such an opportunity, whether we could actually afford to do that with the budget we've allocated.
Yeah, I mean, the budget that we have allocated right now will support, kind of our traditional program and the amount of projects that we've seen so far coming through. We have seen an increase in the number of projects over the last couple of years in particular. So it's been, steadily increased. But that said, as we increase the number of projects, we're starting to burn, through the LCFS fund. Where, up until this point, the revenues from LCFS sales were pretty much replenishing what we were spending annually. Now we're starting to draw down. So this is really why, it's a crucial point in time to look at a new financial model so that we can, ensure that we're going to have options as that LCFS revenue, or the fund decreases.
Okay. So, scramble to adopt onto EV 1.0 is actually 1.0 is not desirable because we can't actually afford to process any significant influx in a reasonable.
Yeah,
amount of time or
I don't
money.
think right now we would be scrambling to say, okay, projects, you have 3 months to complete or you're not gonna get funds. I think, that may be an approach we take down the road.
Okay.
But, ideally, we want to see this as a smoother transition, not a, hard cutoff.
I am especially curious about some of the regulatory or permitting changes we can make. Are we going to potentially revisit? I guess you mentioned an emergency shut-off requirement that is unique to allotted potentially. Are we going to revisit that item? And I'm curious about the background there.
So I mean, I think we heard feedback on a range of permitting issues, and anytime you talk to any group of contractors, you're gonna get a long list. We haven't gone through the process of talking through any of these with our planning and development services or utilities teams yet. And some of them may be feasible, some of them may not. They've been great partners in talking through ideas that come from contractors, and so we'll see where we go with them.
I'll add right now to that we're working on a national designation effort called Charging Smart, where we're going through all of these different areas where we might have opportunities in the city to, improve services. The national designation program looks at like, what are we doing that aligns with best practices? What are we doing beyond that? Where our efforts are the best practice, and then where might we have opportunity for improvement. So we've been going through that process, and it's looking at, programming, it's looking at permitting, it's looking at building codes, it's looking at, ways that we handle things and utilities from a planning perspective. And so all of those different elements are things that we're kind of going through and analyzing right now. So as part of that process, there are also things we're identifying as opportunities for improvement that we've heard from the contractors, what they would like to see, and then we're looking at things that are kind of coming up internally through this best practices analysis, and those will be, opportunities for us to vet as we move forward.
Okay. One utility regulatory change that I'm still curious about is where are we on potentially spreading out the transformer upgrade costs so that they don't come all at once for one particular applicant? I know there was a discussion about this a while ago.
Like the word of the big boss. Welcome back, Mr. Kurtzberg.
Alan Kurtzberg, Director of Utilities, no comment, no, so there are some discussions on, looking at, when we can look at these transformer costs associated, especially with EV charging. Are there funds available, LCM credits? And I think as we start looking at these programs and maybe new transformers that are coming in, that might be a suitable location for it. So there is a balance where we have to have cost recovery for new customers coming in, no matter what their kind of development is, to protect our existing ratepayers and make sure everyone's paying their fair share. We obviously have at the city of Palo Alto reach codes where we want businesses to come in, customers to come in and pay their fair share to join our city and get cost recovery so that that we are insulating our current customers from those new developments as well. So there's a balance there as well. So I think one of the things that we internally are talking about is looking at the overall cost for our customers to make these improvements and upgrades, and is there a way for us to move forward? So if you look at grid modernization, for an example, we are doing a across the board look at our distribution systems in terms of upgrading transformers. If we, in our process, see a transformer that's going to be updated as part of that in a different part of the city, and that would be normally a part of the grid mod, we are incorporating that so the customer won't see it. So we're treating folks equally and equitably is also important as well. You know, that said, for new development coming in that are not part of the grid mod, you know, that there is still a cost associated with them connecting into the system. But as part of the electrification, we're taking a look at that. We work very closely with our development services and our engineering teams to take a look at those processes. So if a customer is looking to electrify, you know, their site, we're trying to stay and keep pace, and that customization is important so that our customers feel like they're being heard and they're also being treated fairly, especially since some of the the tax credits are going away at the end of this calendar year. So we're trying to move at the speed to keep pace with the interest.
Okay. Yeah, I realize this is a deep topic and there's a lot more we could talk about separately about this. Just whenever you have these kinks and incentives, there can be weird outcomes, like a building might really need 5 chargers, but just only install 2. And so they'll install 2 and then maybe years down the line, install 3 more. And then there's just some, you know, discontinuity, some unideal extra costs, or even for like heat pump, HVAC, or water heaters, maybe one person will have to replace their water heater one day and then pay many thousands of extra dollars just because they were the unlucky person that had their old water heater break at a certain time. So it just seems like there's some cleanup in the incentives and like operationalization of our electrification programs if we can get that spread out through the existing programs.
Absolutely spot on and looking at that. So you don't want the last customer who adopts is having to pay for that transformer cost. So, you know, as development comes in, our engineers actually look at the applications coming through and seeing what would we look and do at that site and location so that we're kind of future proofing that. Again, we are seeing a higher level of electrification. We're seeing a higher level of folks have additional demands as they want to do that on their own. So, you know, it is an evaluation that our engineers go through. And then just to your point on EV ready versus EV capable, to Councilman Bird's point, a lot of the developments, they put in all the conduits, they put in the load management systems, but they may just phase the installation of those. And then looking at the long-term transformer costs as well, and so that they can balance that use out, because you know, you look at even some of the EV chargers right now, the type of connection changed, right, in the last few years. So you know, that we see that updates to EV chargers, and then you know the technology changes as well.
Yeah, that's a good point, that EV capable spots shouldn't be counted as capacity as far as other like transformer upgrades go. And I'm just curious, do we have any similar financing programs from any other cities that we can learn from? And yeah, I'm just curious how, like, where this has been tested and what's new.
Well, so, you know, PG&E has an on-bill financing program that they have run for a long time, and they are allowing EV charging now to be incorporated into on-bill financing. So we actually are working to set up a conversation with them to dig in a little bit further into how they're making that work. We are offering on-bill repayment options right now for our residential heat pump program. And so that's working with Go Green Financing, and we're looking at, you know, utilizing Go Green Financing potentially for commercial electrification as well. So we have, you know, a little foray into that, that's where we would be, buying down the interest rate for those loans, and we could utilize Go Green financing for EV charging if we wanted to go that route. Yeah, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Jonathan.
Oh, well, just charging as a service, the concept of being able to recover some of the costs of the capital through, through the charges to the drivers, that business model is already established for public charging. I think we're just taking a few different financing mechanisms and applying them to a novel situation.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting, and yeah, I'll be curious for more updates as this maybe comes back to us in the future. So thank you.
Well, I'm just enjoying this. I'm enjoying seeing Councilmember Burt's enthusiasm, because I know it's been a long time coming for you. And I'm, excited to see the 2.0 come online. Really appreciate the financing options versus incentives. It's just it's now sustainable in 2 ways, right? So that's really terrific. I agree with what my colleagues have been saying. I don't have a lot to add, but I too noted the comment about EV chargers being an amenity, and I'm thinking, well, it's kind of like dishwashers at this point. It's getting to the point that if you don't have them, people begin to look askance at you, and so that's actually should also be sort of wind beneath our wings on this. I was interested to see some of the feedback and options, like on pre-approved equipment setups. I think that's good. Anything we can do to streamline this and make it go faster. I did just have just a practical question. When we're talking about installing chargers like per parking space or having a place where people can use them, is there a third option, or maybe this is what you count as per parking space? But sometimes you'll have like a couple of chargers, but they can each go a couple of spots left or right, and so you have like one box, but it can cover like 4 spots. I assume that's in the mix as well.
Yeah, so those could be like, one pedestal, 2 ports shared between a parking space. It could be smart outlets where people bring their own charger and plug into the outlet. So those are actually very common in a lot of the projects that we've already incentivized.
And how does that, and also it was mentioned, fast versus slow charging and all of that. You can get the different combinations of that as well. And one box, I think I've seen some of those. Is that right?
Yeah, so the smart outlet providers, there's a few out there. Typically they'll have like a L1 15 amp outlet, and then they may also have like a low power L2 outlets of 20 amps or so. And then they can manage the load between those outlets. So, there won't be any more than, say a total of 30 amps of power being pulled at any given time, and then the cars will adjust how much they're pulling. There's also ways, load management to kind of daisy chain the chargers. So, one charger gets full power, that car charges quickly and then it moves on to the next charger. So there's a lot of options out there right now. One of the things that came up in the working group was also, where you install shared chargers, how do you ensure that people are going to be moving their cars so other people can use those chargers? Because as EV adoption gets higher, those shared chargers are going to be in higher demand. And if people aren't moving their vehicles regularly, then that could cause an issue.
Right.
And so then there are other, software programs where you can set up reservations for the chargers. You can have idle fees if you're plugged in but not charging, that starts to accumulate. So there are ways to kind of do that through pricing signals.
Right.
And then, people, when they know their neighbors, they will also just ask them to move the cars. So I think there's a lot of that happens currently, but the software can really help to encourage that behavior change that we're looking for.
Right. No, that's great. Because if you have a fast charger in a multifamily, and people can move through, but it's a little hard with work schedules sometimes to manage that. But it is interesting about the behavior, because you know, at Tesla superchargers, they have that. They're like, you know, don't stay beyond this, or there'll be some penalty in here. Although I'm still grandfathered in with the free charging, so I don't know what they would do to me, but in any event, that's good that we have the tools now to do this kind of thing and to support it. Yeah, and so I like what I see, seeing all the, like you're mentioning the load management strategies, the command response technologies, it's all good. And I think just generally piloting this charging as a service is going to be something where, as was mentioned, we can lead, we can move things forward, and it's exciting to be at that point. So I believe so the design guidelines that you're offering, that's exhibit A in our packet. I know they're set forth on these slides as well. So you're looking for a motion that we recommend to council to adopt these guidelines.
So move.
Thank you. I'll second that. All right, so, all right. Any further comment? Nope, we're all good. All right, would you call the roll?
Councilmember Loop,
Yes.
Chair Vinker,
Yes,
Councilmember Burt.
Yeah.
Motion carries 3-0.
excellent. Well, we're excited. Thank you. Go get them.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, finally, future meetings and agendas. Director Eggleston.
Sure, I'll just touch on the October 17th meeting, which is our next one. Reminder that that's gonna start a half hour later at 2 p.m. And our topics, similarly to the discussion we just had, the first one is design guidelines for the advanced rooftop HVAC pilot program. So that will be a good discussion. And then preliminary results on the gas transition studies.
Good topics. Okay, excellent.